The church was packed wall to wall that Sunday morning. Every seat filled. Latecomers stood quietly along the aisles, pressed against polished wooden pillars. Camera crews adjusted their lenses, red lights blinking as the live broadcast began. Soft worship music faded, replaced by a hush that carried anticipation. Joel Osteen stood confidently at the pulpit, wearing his familiar calm smile. To millions watching, it looked like any other service, uplifting, warm, predictable. Until he paused. The pause stretched just long enough to make people shift in their seats. Then he said something no one expected. Some people believe strength comes from fists, not faith. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Whispers floated like dust in sunlight. This wasn't Joel's usual opening. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried an edge, deliberate, intentional. He continued slowly, letting each word land. They believe power is proven by dominance, by fear, by never bending. The murmur grew louder now. Some nodded. Others frowned, confused. The cameras zoomed in on faces, curiosity, tension, intrigue. Joel rested both hands on the pulpit and looked out over the congregation, scanning rows of people as if searching for someone specific. Then he turned his head slightly to the right. Just enough. And said, "Mr. Chuck Norris, I hear you're here today." The room froze. It wasn't dramatic music or a sudden noise. It was silence. Pure, heavy silence. Even the air felt still. Near the middle rows, a man slowly rose to his feet. Chuck Norris. No dramatic entrance. No spotlight. No applause at first. Just the quiet authority of a legend standing up. He wore a simple jacket, no flashy suit, no ego. His expression was calm, unreadable, the same face audiences had seen survive countless on-screen battles. But this wasn't a movie set. People gasped. Phones lifted. Someone whispered, "Is that really him?" Another voice murmured, "What is about to happen?" Chuck didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply stood there, eyes forward, acknowledging the room without demanding it. Joel looked at him for a long moment. The smile on Joel's face softened, not with humor, but with purpose. In that moment, everyone understood something instinctively. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't small talk. And this wasn't going to be an ordinary Sunday. Something was about to unfold, not with fists, not with shouting, but with words powerful enough to shake the entire room. Chuck Norris stepped fully into the aisle light, and the reaction was immediate. The quiet legend didn't need an introduction. His presence alone carried decades of stories, victories, discipline, and restraint. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if every step had weight. No arrogance. No smile. Just presence. People leaned sideways to get a clearer look. Some whispered his name like a rumor. Others stared in disbelief, unsure whether they were watching a church service or witnessing history unfold. Joel Osteen watched him approach, his expression calm but focused. When Chuck stopped near the front, Joel spoke again, this time more directly. "People praise you as unbeatable," Joel said, his voice steady through the microphone. "They talk about your strength, your toughness, your fearlessness." The crowd nodded. A few claps broke out instinctively. "But real power," Joel continued, "doesn't come from muscles, it comes from belief." That line split the room. Some clapped louder, encouraged by the message. Others gasped, unsure if this was praise or provocation. Chuck listened without interruption. His face didn't harden. He didn't scoff. He simply nodded, a small, respectful acknowledgement that surprised many. Cameras zoomed in, catching the slight movement of his head. Joel went on. "Belief is what carries you when strength fails. Belief is what humbles you when the world calls you invincible." The tension grew, not hostile, but electric. This wasn't a challenge shouted across a ring. It was something quieter, and far more dangerous to pride. Before the moment went any further, the screen subtly shifted. Before we continue, backhand index pointing right, like this video if you respect calm confidence. Backhand index pointing right, comment where you're watching from. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe for powerful real-life stories like this. The service resumed. Chuck finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, without theatrics, the kind of voice that didn't demand attention but received it anyway. "Pastor," he said, "strength without humility is empty." The words landed hard. The crowd leaned forward, almost in unison. Even Joel paused, absorbing the weight of that statement. Chuck continued, eyes forward. "I've spent my life training the body, testing limits, pushing pain aside." He paused. "But the hardest discipline I ever learned was restraint." People exchanged glances. This wasn't the answer they expected. "When you're called strong," Chuck said, "the world assumes you have no doubts, no fears, no need to listen." His gaze briefly swept across the room. "That assumption is dangerous." Joel stepped slightly away from the pulpit now, listening not as a preacher, but as a man. Chuck's tone never rose, but the room felt tighter with every word. "Belief," Chuck said, "isn't weakness. It's the courage to admit you don't control everything." Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. Joel finally spoke again, quieter than before. "Then you understand more than most." Chuck looked at him. For a split second, something shifted, not defiance, not agreement, but recognition. Two different worlds had just met on the same stage. And the crowd could feel it. This wasn't about proving who was stronger. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was the calm before something deeper, something that would test not fists, but conviction. Joel surprised everyone. He stepped away from the pulpit completely now, standing on the same level as the congregation, his voice calm but deliberate. "Then let's test it," Joel said slowly. "Not with violence, but with truth." The words echoed through the sanctuary. A few people straightened in their seats. Others held their breath. This wasn't a sermon anymore. It felt like a moment suspended between confession and confrontation. Joel turned toward Chuck and gestured gently. "Please," he said, "come up here." For a brief second, Chuck didn't move. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood the weight of what was being asked. Then he stepped forward. The sound of his shoes against the floor seemed louder than it should have been. Cameras tracked his movement as he climbed the steps to the stage. The crowd parted visually, eyes following him like a tide pulling inward. When Chuck reached Joel's side, the difference between them was striking. One known for words and faith, the other for fists and discipline. Two paths. One platform. Joel turned to face him. "Tell me something," Joel asked, his tone not accusatory, but searching. "After all your fights, your fame, your fearlessness." He paused. "What do you still struggle with?" The question landed like a sudden drop. No build-up. No protection. No easy escape. The silence that followed was heavy, not empty, but full. It pressed against the walls, against the cameras, against every person watching live or from a screen miles away. Chuck stared forward, jaw tightening slightly. For the first time, he didn't look like a man preparing to strike. He looked like a man being asked to remove armor. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 3. Some thought he wouldn't answer. Then Chuck exhaled. "Control." The word was quiet, but it detonated. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people instinctively covered their mouths. Others blinked in disbelief, as if they hadn't heard correctly. Control? Chuck Norris, the man known for absolute dominance, struggling with control? Chuck nodded once, as if confirming it to himself. "I was trained," he said, voice steady but lower now, "to never lose." He looked out at the audience, not seeing individuals, but memories. Every fight, every role, every challenge, the message was the same. Win. Dominate. End it. He swallowed. That kind of training changes you. Joel didn't interrupt. He didn't move. He just listened. Chuck continued. When you're told your whole life that you must always be in control, you start believing control is survival. A few heads nodded slowly. But life, Chuck said, his voice tightening just slightly, doesn't follow rules like a fight does. He turned his head toward Joel now. You can do everything right, and still lose something that matters. The room felt heavier. I lost people, Chuck said. I lost moments I can't get back. All because I thought strength meant holding tighter. His hands clenched briefly, then relaxed. I was trained to never lose, he repeated. But life taught me something different. He paused. You can't win everything alone. That sentence changed the room. Not applause. Not cheers. Just understanding. Joel finally spoke, softly. That realization, Joel said, takes more courage than any fight. Chuck looked down for a moment, then nodded. I spent years mastering my body, Chuck said. But mastering myself, that's still a fight. The cameras captured Joel's expression. Not triumph, not surprise, but respect. The crowd wasn't watching a legend anymore. They were watching a man stand exposed, not weakened, but honest. And everyone could feel it. This wasn't a challenge meant to embarrass. It wasn't a test to declare a winner. It was the moment where strength stopped being about control, and started being about truth. And whatever came next, it was clear. This encounter had already changed the room forever. Joel stepped down from the pulpit. It was a small movement, but it carried enormous meaning. He left the elevated space behind, stepping onto the same floor as Chuck, removing the last visible line between preacher and guest, between guide and warrior. The microphones caught the soft sound of his shoes touching the stage, and the room seemed to lean inward. Then you already understand faith more than you realize, Joel said gently. He stood close now, not invading space, not posturing, just present. Joel placed a hand on Chuck's shoulder. Not a grip. Not a gesture for the cameras. A steady, human touch. This world cheers power, Joel continued, his voice calm but piercing. But heaven honors surrender. The words hung in the air. Chuck's jaw tightened. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resistance. It was something deeper, the tension of a man standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. His eyes changed. Those who had watched Chuck Norris for decades recognized the look instantly. It wasn't the stare before a strike. It was the look that came after a battle, when adrenaline fades and truth remains. I've broken boards, Chuck said quietly. Wood, stone, limits people told him were impossible. But this, he paused, searching for the words. This is harder. A subtle shift rippled through the crowd. People who came expecting inspiration now felt something else, vulnerability unfolding in real time. Joel didn't move his hand. He didn't interrupt. He allowed the moment to breathe. Chuck took a slow breath. I was taught to push through pain, he said. To ignore fear. To never step back. His voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. That training saved me many times, Chuck admitted. But it also taught me to bury things. He looked out across the room, eyes scanning faces, young, old, hopeful, broken. When you bury fear, he said, you also bury doubt. And when you bury doubt, you bury questions. Joel nodded slightly. And faith, Joel said softly, often begins with questions. Chuck let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. That's the part one never trained for, Chuck admitted. How to let go, without feeling like I failed. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was reverent. Joel finally removed his hand, stepping half a pace back, giving Chuck space to stand on his own. Surrender isn't losing, Joel said. It's trusting that you don't have to carry everything yourself. Chuck looked down at his hands. Hands that had fought. Hands that had defended. Hands that had controlled. Slowly, he opened them. For years, Chuck said, I believed surrender meant weakness. He looked up now, meeting Joel's eyes. But standing here, I realize it might be the bravest thing I've never done. A quiet gasp moved through the audience. No applause followed. No one dared break the moment. For the first time, the crowd didn't see a fighter. They didn't see a legend. They saw a man, one who had carried strength like armor for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. Joel spoke one last time in that moment. You don't stop being strong when you surrender, he said. You just stop pretending you're alone. Chuck nodded, once, firmly. Something invisible shifted. The cameras captured it, but they couldn't fully explain it. This wasn't about religion versus toughness. It wasn't about winning a debate. It was about transformation. And everyone watching could feel it. The turning point had arrived, not with thunder, not with applause, but with a quiet truth spoken aloud. And from this moment on, nothing between them, or within Chuck himself, would ever be the same. Chuck suddenly turned away from Joel and faced the audience. The movement was unexpected, sharp, deliberate, and it pulled every eye in the room toward him. The cameras adjusted instantly, zooming in, sensing something unscripted was happening. "I've faced armies in movies," Chuck said, his voice steady but unmistakably different now. "Battles. Explosions. Enemies designed to break me." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, then faded. "But today," he continued, "I was challenged without a single blow." The words settled slowly, like dust after a collapse. Chuck scanned the room. Elderly couples. Young families. Teenagers watching with wide eyes. People who had come expecting comfort, not confrontation with truth. "I've spent my life preparing for impact," Chuck said. "For resistance. For attack." He paused. "No one prepares you for stillness." The room was silent. "For years," Chuck went on, "I believed courage meant never bowing. Never yielding. Never letting anyone see the weight." His jaw tightened again, but this time, he didn't fight it. "And today," he said, voice lower now, "I realized something." He took a breath. "The hardest opponent I've ever faced is the part of me that doesn't want to let go." Then, slowly, Chuck bowed his head. Not in defeat. Not in shame. In acknowledgement. In surrender. The effect was immediate. The church erupted, not with cheers, but with emotion. Some people stood instinctively. Others pressed hands to their mouths. Tears streamed freely now, not dramatic, not staged, real. Raw. A woman in the front row began crying openly. Somewhere near the back, a man whispered, "Wow," over and over again like a prayer. The cameras caught trembling hands, shaking shoulders. Faces changed by something deeper than inspiration. And then, appearing on screen. Backhand index pointing right comment, "Respect, if this moment surprised you." Backhand index pointing right like if true strength moved you. Backhand index pointing right subscribe if you believe power isn't always loud. Chuck lifted his head slowly. His eyes were glassy, but focused. "I don't know who needs to hear this," he said. "But you don't lose your strength when you stop pretending." Joel stepped closer, careful not to interrupt the moment. "You gain something far greater," Chuck added. "You gain peace." Joel leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "This is what real courage looks like." The words sent another wave through the room. Chuck nodded once. For the first time that day, he smiled, not the confident smile of a hero, but the quiet smile of someone who had finally set something down. The applause came then. Slow at first. Then stronger. Rising, not to celebrate a celebrity, but to honor honesty. People weren't clapping for Chuck Norris the legend. They were clapping for Chuck Norris the man. A man who stood in front of thousands and admitted that strength alone was never enough. As the applause continued, Joel raised his hand gently, asking for calm. "Let this moment stay with you," Joel said. "Because what you just witnessed was not weakness." He looked at Chuck. It was freedom. Chuck exhaled deeply, a breath that seemed years overdue. And in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't a shocking moment because of who Chuck Norris was. It was shocking because of what he chose to do. He didn't fight. He didn't defend. He didn't dominate. He surrendered. And the room, full of people who came carrying invisible battles, left knowing one powerful truth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is bow your head and let go. Chuck took the microphone one last time. The applause slowly faded, not because the emotion had passed, but because the room instinctively knew something final was about to be said. Chuck stood at center stage now, the microphone steady in his hand. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He waited until the silence returned. "People think I never fall," Chuck said quietly. That's the lie. A few heads tilted. Others froze completely. They see the wins, he continued. The victories. The highlights. The stories that get repeated. He glanced briefly at the floor, then back up. They don't see the moments alone. The doubts. The nights where strength doesn't answer the question. The room listened without a single interruption. I've fallen more times than I can count, Chuck said. Not in ways that make headlines, but in ways that change you. He turned toward Joel now. Today, Chuck said, his voice firm but grateful, you didn't challenge my strength. He paused. You challenged my heart. Joel nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the words. For a long time, Chuck went on, I thought my job was to be unbreakable. To never show weakness. To always have the answer. A soft exhale escaped him. But standing here today, I realized something. He gestured gently toward the crowd. The people who inspire me the most aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who stand back up, without pretending they didn't hit the ground. A quiet murmur of agreement moved through the sanctuary. Chuck lowered the microphone slightly. I don't need to prove anything today, he said. Not my toughness. Not my legacy. He looked directly at Joel again. And I thank you, Chuck said, for reminding me that strength isn't measured by control, but by courage. Joel stepped forward then. He didn't reach for the microphone. He didn't try to add to the moment. He extended his hand. Chuck looked at it for a brief second, then took it. They shook hands. Firm. Respectful. Equal. No rivalry. No winner. No loser. Just two men acknowledging each other's truth. The crowd rose to their feet in unison. Not a roar, but a standing ovation filled with meaning. Joel finally spoke. What you shared today, Joel said, will stay with people long after this service ends. Chuck nodded. If even one person, Chuck replied, feels less alone because of it, then it was worth every word. Joel smiled softly. That's the heart of it. Chuck turned back to the audience for a final time. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said. You just have to be honest. The sentence echoed, simple, direct, unforgettable. He handed the microphone back. As he stepped slightly away from center stage, something about his posture had changed. He wasn't smaller. He wasn't diminished. He was lighter. The cameras captured it. The audience felt it. This wasn't the end of a confrontation. It was the resolution of something much deeper, a reminder that real understanding doesn't come from proving who's right, but from being willing to listen. And in that quiet handshake between faith and discipline, something powerful had been resolved, not with force, but with grace. That day taught everyone one thing. Not a complicated lesson. Not a loud declaration. A simple truth, one that settled quietly into the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The strongest man in the room isn't the one who can fight. It's the one brave enough to be honest. People didn't leave the church talking about celebrity. They didn't leave replaying a dramatic moment for shock value. They left thinking about themselves. About the battles they fight in silence. About the masks they wear to appear strong. About the moments they almost asked for help, and didn't. What made that day unforgettable wasn't that a famous man spoke. It was that a strong man listened. Chuck Norris didn't lose anything by standing there in truth. He gained something far greater, perspective. And Joel didn't win anything either. He simply created space for honesty to exist. That's why the moment mattered. Because real strength doesn't humiliate. It doesn't dominate. It doesn't need applause. Real strength invites reflection. It allows vulnerability without fear. It turns silence into understanding. And it reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a bowed head. Sometimes it's a pause. Sometimes it's 3 words spoken honestly. I struggle too. If you felt something during the story, it's because it touched a place we all share, the place where fear and faith wrestle quietly inside us. Backhand index pointing right, type humility in the comments if you believe faith beats fear. Backhand index pointing right, like this video if this story changed your perspective. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe for more moments that shake the soul. The world teaches us to armor up, to hide cracks, to pretend control equals peace. But that day proved something different. Peace begins when we stop pretending. Freedom begins when we surrender the need to look strong. And faith begins when we admit we don't have all the answers. The greatest battles are rarely fought in front of crowds. They happen late at night, in quiet thoughts, in decisions no one else sees. And winning those battles doesn't require fists. It requires humility. So wherever you're watching from, whether you're strong, tired, hopeful, or unsure, remember this. You don't have to be unbreakable. You just have to be real. Because sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought against the world. They're fought within.